Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Commander's Core studio. Welcome to the show. So spoiler season, day 5 has been cooking. Okay, bad catering joke. Anyways, Rocco Cabaretti Caterer is a really interesting commander, so make sure you check out that episode at some point because, yeah, with it, any creature can be your commander. Kind of. Also, check out my episode on Widespread Thievery, a card that has me and a lot of others saying, no. But don't leave to check out that episode or this one on Agnes the Dragon's Lash, which is all about, treasures. Lots and lots of treasures. And speaking of that, Vazi on this episode is saying, did you say treasures? Because, yeah, this commander might put some others to shame when it comes to treasure production. And again, a huge thank you to Eddie for all the help during spoiler season, and of course, if I make any mistakes on this episode or any other episode, or any mistakes at all, yeah, just blame Eddie, because it's always Eddie's fault, not mine. And with that said, let's jump into it. So, Vazi Keen Negotiator is a 3/3 human advisor with haste that costs 2 black, red, green. And here we go. Tap. Target opponent creates X treasure tokens, where X is the number of treasure tokens you created this turn. Whenever an opponent casts a spell or activates an ability, if mana from a treasure was spent to cast it or to activate it, put a +1 counter on target creature, then draw a card. Okay, so whereas the game plan for a lot of treasure decks out there is to just make a bunch of treasures for yourself and utilize them, the game plan for this commander is, hey, I'm gonna make a ton of treasures and then also give you a ton of treasures. So whereas Feldergriff is like, hey, have some hippos, Vazi's like, hey, have some treasures. Yeah, not exactly what you expect to see from a Jund commander, but also this is a very interesting commander that you can take in a couple of different directions and do some pretty unexpected things, and yeah, I mean, utilizing those treasures that you're giving your opponents for your own benefit. Now, obviously, with that second part, you already are getting a benefit. However, when I first read this commander, I was like, oh, so it's kind of like a reverse Korvold, where whenever your opponents are sacrificing treasures, you get counters on your things and you draw cards. Vazi is much more limited than that, and that's probably a good thing. I mean, Korvold is one of the most popular and broken commanders for a reason, so yeah, let's not have another one out there. Because, again, whereas Korvold's like, hey, you sacrifice a treasure, you get a counter, and you also get to draw a card. This one is, hey, okay. All right, you just cast that spell. All right, did you spend any treasures to cast that spell? No, it doesn't matter if you spent 1 or, 10, it still only is going to trigger once. So again, if someone is being smart and only wants to give you a, small benefit from you giving them a ton of treasures, they're going to sacrifice as many treasures as they can to cast that spell or activate that ability, instead of being like, oh, okay, I'll tap some of my lands and then also sacrifice 1 treasure. Now, they can go about this however they will, but again, if they want to give you the least benefit, they'll utilize the most treasures they can with each one of those actions, so you only get 1 counter and 1 card per each one, and not per each treasure, unlike Korvold. Now, obviously, this is the kind of commander where you can wheel and deal, and that's definitely going to play a part in how you play this commander. Because if you are making deals with opponents with this, you're going to be like, okay, I'm going to give you like 6 treasures this turn. What are you going to do for me? And one of those stipulations very well could be, you can only utilize these treasures 1 at a time. Now, that might be a tough sell for an opponent because then you're getting a ton of value. Again, if they keep utilizing those for spells and abilities 1 at a time, you are getting, 6 counters and also 6 cards drawn. So yeah, basically Korvold. So maybe you can, get that to be 2 at a time or 3 or whatnot. But yeah, if you can just kind of pit your opponents against each other, which, can be a very Jun thing to do, you essentially are like, okay, hey, I'm going to give which one of you 3 opponents treasures. It's whichever one of you convinces me, okay? Here's what's on the table. Again, the player that agrees first to activate these treasures and utilize them 1 at a time for separate spells and abilities, then you get them. Okay, you get the 6 treasures. That's 6 free mana to utilize. So yeah, wheeling and dealing can definitely be the way to get the most value out of this commander. That being said, of course, there are a lot of cards that can do some pretty spicy things with this commander. And like previous quick takes on commanders, I've included a link in the description below that has all the cards I'm talking about on this episode because, yeah, if you're interested in this commander and want to build around it and might want to pick up some of the cards earlier rather than later because some cards tend to go up in price when a commander becomes really popular very quickly once it's spoiled, yeah, go ahead and, check that list out and maybe pick some up. And now with all that said, let's jump into it. Now, these come as fantastic recommendations from Eddie, and the first one I can see absolutely jumping in price with this commander being spoiled. Now, obviously, I could be wrong in that, but this seems like a home run in that deck. Viridian Revel, thank you, Eddie, for pointing this one out. But also blame any in the comments below. Anyways, it's an enchantment for 1 green, and it says, whenever an artifact is put into an opponent's graveyard from the battlefield, you may draw a card. This is incredible with this commander. Again, this essentially is basically like, hey, let's build our own Corvold. Again, let's say on your turn you make 6 treasures or whatnot, and then you tap your commander to give an opponent 6 treasures. When they utilize those treasures, again, even if they utilize them all at once, okay, you get your commander's trigger once, you get to draw 1 card, and you get a counter on something, but you get this trigger from Viridian Revel 6 times. So that is 6 cards drawn simply by activating your commander. Now, obviously, yes, that is dependent on your opponents actually utilizing those, but also there are other ways to, well, not depend on that, and we'll talk about those here in a bit. And another card that is, well, quite funny with all these treasures is Fangren Marauder, a 5/5 beast that says whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may gain 5 life. This counts artifacts that anyone controls, not just your own. So yeah, when you're sacrificing your treasures, that's 5 life per treasure. When your opponent sacrificed those treasures that you gave them, that's also 5 life per treasure. Absolutely incredible. So yeah, it's going to be pretty hard to take you out when your life total is just absurdly high. Again, just saying you're creating 6 treasures, right? 6. That's 30 life for you when you sacrifice your treasures, and 30 more life when that opponent sacrifices their treasures. That's 60 life from essentially, 1 turn of treasure creation and activation. And then another card that I point out is actually a pretty old one, a really old one from Antiquities. It is $24.15, so goodness gracious, yeah, it's on the reserve list. Regardless, it's an enchantment that says, its Oracle text reads, whenever an artifact an opponent controls becomes tapped or an opponent activates an artifact's ability without tapping its activation, you gain 1 life. So this not only counts obviously when your opponents utilize those treasures, but it also counts when they're tapping their mana rocks or, utilizing other artifact abilities. So just another way to gain a lot of life throughout the game in this kind of attack. But on the other side, we can also punish our opponents for utilizing treasures or not utilizing them. For example, Ancient Runes is a really spicy card. It says, during each player's upkeep, Ancient Runes deals 1 damage to that player for each artifact they control. So obviously this impacts you as well, but if you've got, Fangren Marauder in play, that doesn't matter. You're just going to gain an incredible amount of life. This is kind of all right, you better use those treasures quickly or you're going to get punished for keeping them around. But on the other side, yes, yet another really old card recommendation from Eddie with Haunting Wind. This one is also from Antiquities. It is an enchantment for 3 and a black, and its Oracle text reads, whenever an artifact becomes tapped or a player activates an artifact's ability without tapping its activation, Haunting Wind deals 1 damage to that artifact's controller. Obviously, again, keep in mind this does impact you as well, but yeah, basically, hey, if anyone tries to tap artifacts, including mana rocks and yes, treasures, you're gonna get pinged. So obviously you are giving your opponents a benefit, but you also kind of put them in a situation where they're going to be taking damage no matter what. Speaking of which, you can also consider utilizing cards like Disciple of the Vault and Magnetic Mine. Disciple of the Vault says whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may have target opponent lose 1 life. This tiny 1 mana creature can have a massive impact on the game. Whenever you sacrifice your treasures, you drain whoever you want. And whenever your opponent sacrifices treasures, including those treasures that you gave them, you drain whoever you want. So you can be like, all right, opponent, that player over there is getting pretty dangerous. I'm going to give you a ton of treasures for some deals and stuff like that. Yeah, we'll work out the details later. Sacrifice them pretty quickly, though, so I can drain that other player, okay? On the other hand, though, there's Magnetic Mine, which says whenever their artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, Magnetic Mine deals 2 damage to that artifact's controller. So, yes, again, this does impact us as well, so consider that, but also consider that, well, we also have a lot of ways to gain some life in this deck, too, so, and with, Finger Marauder, a ton of life. Our opponents, however, might not be as lucky, and again, if we give them a ton of, treasures, they might not be able to utilize them because it's going to take too much damage for them to do so. But if they don't utilize them, well, maybe we just cast Vandal Blast and then destroy all artifacts we don't control, when we overload it. So then all those artifacts are going to the graveyard anyways, so goodbye treasures that we gave you. And take a ton of damage thanks to Magnetic Mine, and Disciple the Vault, draining life too. So yeah, this is definitely a kind of like giveth and taketh away kind of deck where you're like, all right, yeah, here's this gift, but use it or don't. You're in a tough situation, and if you don't use it, I'll get rid of it for you. Yeah, putting your opponents between a rock and a hard place can be, well, a lot of fun with a deck like this. Now, of course, like I've mentioned in this color combination, you've got a lot of ways to make a ton of treasures. I mean, Brass's Bounty, Dockside Extortionist, and Old Gnawbone, just to name a few. Brass's Bounty is going to make a treasure for each land you control. Dockside is already an incredibly powerful card, and it's just bonkers in this deck. It says, when it enters the battlefield, create X treasure tokens where X is the number of artifacts and enchantments your opponents control. So, give your opponents a ton of treasures, and then they have a lot of artifacts in play. Then you play this and make an absurd amount of treasures to give your opponents even more treasures. And obviously, your opponents might be able to, in response, sacrifice their treasures to, cast some things or just waste the mana or whatnot, just so that you don't get more treasures with this. But you also might, again, have some of those negative impacts in play, like a Disciple of the Vault, to deter them from doing so. Regardless, Old Gnawbone is another way to make a lot of treasures. It says whenever a creature you control deals counter to a player, create that many treasure tokens. Again, keep in mind that our commander can get more and more counters on creatures when our opponents utilize treasures for, abilities and spells. So, yeah, we can make a ton of treasures with this. Speaking of which, we also have some other repeatable treasure-making effects with things like Tireless Provisioner, Storm-Killed Artist, and Pitiless Plunderer. Tireless Prisoner has landfall whenever land enters the battlefield under control. Create a food. Who's going to create a food token? Or a treasure token. There we go. And then Storm-Killed Artist says, Magecraft, whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, create a treasure token. And on top of that, it's going to get +1/+0 for each artifact you control. So, yeah, this can hit really hard. And then, of course, Pitiless Plunderer says, whenever another creature you control dies, create a treasure token. So yeah, just by having cards like these in play, you can generate a good amount of treasures throughout the game for a lot of value. And again, the more treasures you can make in a turn, the more you can give to an opponent. Next up, I mean, you know how Pitiless Plunderer can make you treasures when your creatures go away? Well, Revel Enriches is like, hey, let's do the opposite. Whenever your opponent's creatures die, you get a treasure token. Oh, and by the way, if you get to your next upkeep and you've got 10 or more treasures, you win! So yeah, that's pretty easy to do, actually. Well, it's easy to get to 10 treasures. I guess I shouldn't say that it's easy to keep this around because this is a big target to take out. And speaking of big targets to take out, my goodness, a brand new one is Burglar's Halo Stash. And I did an entire episode on this card and how just incredibly busted it is and how, well, it's probably going to be the chase card of the entire set. Very, very expensive, I am sure. Lands you control have tap, create a treasure token because green needed more good things. Gross. But yeah, check out my episode on that one at some point when you get a chance. And of course, you can get even more benefits when you're making your treasures with things like Zorn or Academy Manufacturer. Zorn says if you'd create one or more treasure tokens instead, create those tokens plus an additional treasure token. And Academy Manufacturer says if you create a clue, food, or treasure token instead, create one of each. So now you basically just get free food and free clues. Now, obviously with this one, you might need to be a little careful depending on if you have some of those punishing effects like, that Magnetic Mine where it's like, hey, you've got a lot of artifacts in play. If those hit the graveyard, you're going to get pinged for a ton. That being said, on the other hand, if you got those life gain effects, you're going to be good to go. And one final thing that I want to mention with this commander is that, well, you can really take advantage of untap effects, like one that we see on Sereth the Viper's Fang. Sereth says, other tapped creatures you control have Death Touch. Other untapped creatures you control have Hexproof, and by paying 1, you can tap to untap another target creature or land you control. Untapping our commander can be an incredibly powerful thing. By tapping our commander again, we can, double up on the amount of treasures that we're giving that same opponent, or we can spread it around and give more treasures to someone else. And yeah, you can utilize a lot of different untap effects to just do this multiple times in a turn. And again, if you've got those punishing effects that are like, hey, if your artifacts hit the graveyard, you get pinged for a ton. Or if you don't use your artifacts, you get pinged for a ton. When you put your opponents in those tough situations, it's always better to just give them even tougher situations by giving them more treasures. Now, obviously, you do need to be careful with how much mana you give someone access to because, well, mana is a very powerful thing. But now as this episode is coming to a close, it's time for me to give you my final thoughts on Vazi, Keen Negotiator. I think this is a very unique commander, one that I definitely did not expect to see, and definitely not in Jund, but when you kind of build around the deck, it kind of makes sense why it's there. Regardless, this is going to lead to some very interesting games where you're giving your opponents a lot of value, but they're also giving you value in return, and eventually you're just going to punish them for, all the presents that you're giving them. But yeah, this spoiler season seems like it's just been hit after hit after hit, a ton of exciting spoilers, so if you haven't seen my other quick takes, make sure you check those out, and of course, make sure you stay tuned for even more exciting quick takes. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thank you again, and have a good one.